Hey Explorers, welcome to the Microsoft AI Advent Calendar, the Winter Party Exploration Series. I'm Wesley Camargo, and today it's the day number 19 of our OpenAI exploration journey. So let's check what's waiting for us. Role-based access control for Azure OpenAI Services. Great. So once again, I'm sharing the documentation from Microsoft. This is a great source to learn. And here you have all information that you need to understand which permissions are specific of Azure OpenAI Service. Stepping back, what is role-based access control? This is also known as RBAC. Basically, this is authorization system that you can grant access to individual level. So imagine that you have a person that needs the certain permissions. So you don't need to grant permission by permission. You can grant a permission based in a role, for example, a user, and this user will have all necessary permissions that's necessary to make their job. Okay. So related to Azure OpenAI Service, we have here an explanation how to do this by portal, but we are going to do this using Bicep. I will show you later how to do that. And here we have information about specific roles to Azure OpenAI. Basically, we have Cognitive Services OpenAI User, Cognitive Services OpenAI Contributor, Cognitive Services Contributor, and Cognitive Services Usage Reader. What are the differences? Basically, users has less permissions than the other ones, and they are allowed to use only to use the already deployed OpenAI services. So somebody else needs to configure that, create the models, deploy the models, configure it, and then make it available to the users to consume it. So this is, let's say, the lowest level of permission that you have on Azure OpenAI. So here you can't create OpenAI resources, you can't regenerate keys, you can't create models, and so on and so on. So what's necessary to create them? So you need OpenAI contributor permission. It has a bit more permissions than the user, but still limited. So with the contributor, Cognitive Services OpenAI contributor, you can create and fine-tune your models. You can also upload data sets, and you can create models. Basically, you are allowed to operate the OpenAI portal from inside. So everything that's related to Azure, you are not allowed to do with this permission as well. And then you have Cognitive Services contributor. So do not mix up with OpenAI contributor. Both are contributors, but as I said, this is more about the OpenAI portal, and this is more about Azure portal, which will be able to create and operate in the Azure level of OpenAI. Okay. So basically, when you need to deploy a new OpenAI service, you use this. When you need to fine-tune and do more advanced stuff under the OpenAI portal, you have OpenAI contributor. And if you just need to use what was already configured, you use the user permission. Apart from those three, we also have Cognitive Services Usage Reader, which is basically a permission to view quota allocated on Azure. So in previous videos, we showed about quotas. So if you need to manage this, this is the permission required for that. Okay. In summary, we have this table where everything you can see clearly which permissions each one has and hasn't. So Cognitive Service Contributor, it's the most complete one, which does everything except quota. So if you need quota, you need the user's reader permission. Okay. Now let's check how can we grant the permissions using Azure Bicep. So I have here the repo. It's the same repo that we used for other parts of this series of videos. Today we are using the branch day 19. And here, to deploy this, I'm basically using Azure Bicep. Here we have, I'm using exactly the same template that was created before to deploy the cognitive services. And here on the bottom, I have a call to a module. This is a module that I built. So let's dive into this. This it's under Microsoft authorization, role assignment. So here we basically have the Bicep module where we are deploying in the scope of resource group. So all the permissions are being applied on the resource group level. This is good because you don't make micromanagement if you use this approach. You can also grant this on the cognitive services itself. Depends on your strategy, but I would recommend at least on the resource group level. So here we have the principal type parameters. We also have a principal ID. We have role definitions, role IDs as a variable, and I'll explain then what they mean. Principal ID, it's basically a grid that a user, a service principal, or an object in Azure has, and then it's a unique identifier under your Microsoft Entra ID, previously called as Azure AD. So there are some types that are supported, basically device, foreign group, service principal, and user. We will use a user as in your example, but you can use for service principals, for example, to deploy using CI/CD tool or any other use cases that you might have. So we need to inform the principal type. So I made this list restricted. So if somebody types something that is not part of the list, it will be blocked. The principal ID is the ID itself that we need this to grant the permission. And here we have a list of role definitions. If you remember, this is the list that we just saw here. I simplified this, creating again an array list with the possible options so we can avoid mistakes. Here I have a variable, internal variable on my Bicep module, which is basically a map between the role name and the command, the ID retrieving process that Bicep will do. So basically, you will inform the cognitives that you want cognitive services OpenAI user permission. And then here I will look on this map which is equivalent to this, and I will return this command that will be applied here, and then we will have the correct ID on our being deployed to Azure. The role assignment resource itself, it's quite simple. It's under Microsoft authorization. I made a for each here because here I can receive a list, so I can grant one or more permissions to the same entity at once. I don't need to run it several times. So for every item on my list, every permission that I want to grant, I will iterate this. And then here I will create a new grid, which will be the name of the role definition on Azure, the role assignment on Azure, using the resource group ID, principal ID, and role definition. It will be ensured that this is unique. And here are the properties of our role assignment. So the ID, I already explained it, the principal ID, which is the GUID that we have from Microsoft Entra, and then here the principal type, in our case, user, or might be service principal. So in our call of the module, I already configured this. The principal ID is of a user that I have prepared with no permissions. And I'm granting cognitive services contributor, but let's change this only to OpenAI user. I will remove this permission and replace this. Before I want so here we can see that we have no resources. We cannot see any resource on Azure. Now I will grant the permission by running the pipeline. So here I have already prepared PowerShell with Azure CLI. Let's just run our Bicep and wait until it's ready. So our deployment has finished. So let's see on the portal what we are able to see. Nothing. Why? Because here it's the Azure portal and we granted only user permission. So if we go to the and copy this URL, paste here, it's somehow so if we open an incognito window, paste it here. This is basically the URL to the OpenAI service. So I need to authenticate on my multi-factor app. And now we are able to see the portal. So I can open the chat. So I can already start using it. So let's ask how when is the night of Christmas? The night of Christmas is on December 24th. It is commonly known as Christmas Eve, and it's celebrated in many cultures around the world as the night before Christmas Day. We can also use completions and DALL-E. And here, as I mentioned before, because we are just users, we are not able to deploy new models. Okay, so we cannot deploy anything new. We can just use the ones we already have. To deploy them, we need to return here, and I will grant higher permission, that's contributor. It will be able to deploy new models, but also grant access to Azure portal, and then we can manage Azure things from there. So here I will run once again, and let's wait for the deployment. So our deployment has finished. Let's check what we have. Let me try to refresh this first. So the OpenAI portal, we have now permission to create new deployments. So we can create Whisper models or any other that's desired. Let's check now the Azure portal. So if we refresh our screen, we can now see our resource group. And then we can see that we have the models already deployed there. Curious thing, if we compare with my other user that has more permissions, we can see other resources. For that permission, we specifically see permissions to Azure OpenAI. And here we cannot see because we don't have permissions, but if we check on the user that has more permissions, we can see that we have Cognitive Services contributor permission and Cognitive Services OpenAI user permissions assigned to the user that I was demonstrating. Right, so that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next video.